It felt like my entire world crumbled that night. My own son stole a fortune from me and then deleted the security footage that could have saved me. I still remember the exact silence that followed, heavier than any scream I could have let out. The weight of betrayal pressed against my chest like a stone I couldn't lift. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 73 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in a building that's seen better days. The radiator clanks all winter, and the neighbors upstairs play their television too loud, but it's been home for nearly 40 years. My husband Robert and I moved here when Mark was just 8 years old. We dreamed of something bigger, something better, but life has a way of keeping your feet planted where you least expect them. Every morning, I wake up at 5:30. Not by choice anymore, but because my body refuses to sleep past dawn. The sounds of New York creep through my bedroom window. Garbage trucks groaning down Amsterdam Avenue, early commuters shuffling to the subway, the distant hum of a city that never sleeps but somehow always leaves me feeling alone. I make my coffee in the same chipped mug Robert bought me 20 years ago. It says, "World's Best Mom" in faded blue letters. Some mornings, I wonder if he'd take it back if he could see me now. The morning that changed everything started like any other. I was buttering a day-old bagel when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text message from my daughter-in-law, Sandra. "Hi, Eleanor. Sorry, but we're going to have to cancel Emma's birthday party tonight. Something came up." Rain check? I stared at that message for what felt like hours. Emma is my granddaughter, my only granddaughter. She was turning 7, and I'd been looking forward to her party for weeks. I'd bought her a beautiful dress, pink with little flowers, the kind she loves, and wrapped it carefully in paper covered with unicorns. The gift sat on my kitchen table, mocking me with its bright cheerfulness. I called Mark immediately. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. His voice, so charming and warm when he wanted something, now felt cold through the speaker. "You've reached Mark Henderson. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." But he wouldn't get back to me. He never did anymore. I walked to my living room window and looked out at the street below. People hurried past with purpose, with places to be, with families expecting them. And here I was, holding my phone like it might ring with an explanation that made sense. But deep down, in that place where truth lives even when we don't want to face it, I knew this wasn't about something coming up. This was about me not being wanted there. You know what hurts the most about being dismissed by your own family? It's not the big dramatic moments. It's not the shouting or the arguments. It's the quiet erasure. The gradual way you stop mattering. The way your voice becomes background noise, your needs become inconveniences, your love becomes something they take for granted. I sat down in Robert's old chair, brown leather, worn smooth from 43 years of marriage, and closed my eyes. The smell of his pipe tobacco still lingered faintly in the fabric, even though he'd been gone for 3 years now. Sometimes I catch myself talking to him, asking him what he would do, how he would handle Mark's coldness, Sandra's dismissiveness, the way our family had slowly pulled away from me after his death. Robert always said Mark would grow up eventually. "He's just finding himself, Ellie," he'd say. "Give him time." But time had given me arthritis in my hands, gray in my hair, and loneliness in my heart. Time had taken my husband and left me with a son who saw me as an ATM and a daughter-in-law who saw me as an inconvenience. That evening, instead of celebrating my granddaughter's birthday, I found myself pulling out old photo albums. Page after page of memories. Mark's first steps right here in this living room. His high school graduation where he looked so proud and I looked so hopeful. His wedding day when Sandra wore my grandmother's pearls and promised we'd be family forever. In every picture, I was there. Supporting, loving, giving, believing. The photos told a story I'd been trying not to see. In the early ones, Mark's smile reached his eyes when he looked at me. But somewhere along the way, that changed. The smiles became posed. The hugs became obligatory. The visits became transactions. I remember exactly when it started. Mark was 25, fresh out of college with a business degree and dreams bigger than his bank account. He'd started a small consulting firm with 2 friends, and they needed capital. "Mom, this is it," he'd said, sitting right here on my couch, his eyes bright with possibility. "This is my chance to make something of myself, but I need $50,000 to get started." $50,000. Robert and I had saved that money over 15 years. It was supposed to be our retirement cushion, our security blanket. But when your son looks at you with hope in his eyes and tells you he needs your help to chase his dreams, how do you say no? How do you tell him that his future might be more important than yours, but your security matters too? I gave him the money. Of course I did. What mother wouldn't? The business failed within 18 months. "It wasn't my fault, Mom," Mark had explained, his voice tinged with frustration and embarrassment. "The market shifted. The economy took a turn. We couldn't have predicted it." And maybe that was true. Maybe it really wasn't his fault. But the money was gone, and with it, a piece of my trust that I didn't even realize I was losing. But that was just the beginning. Over the years, there were more requests. Smaller ones, usually. 500 here for car repairs. 1,000 there for unexpected medical bills. 2,000 for Emma's preschool tuition when Sandra's teaching salary came up short. Each request came with a story, a reason, a promise that this would be the last time. And each time, I said yes. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We give until there's nothing left to give, and then we find a way to give a little more. But somewhere in all that giving, I lost track of what I was receiving in return. The phone calls became shorter. The visits became less frequent. The invitations became cancellations. My son had learned that I would always be there with an open wallet, but he'd forgotten that I might need something too. Not money, but time. Attention. Love that wasn't conditional on what I could provide. Robert used to warn me about this. "Ellie, honey, you're too generous," he'd say after Mark would leave with another check. "Sometimes helping too much doesn't actually help at all." But Robert had a way of saying things that didn't sound like criticism, and I'd brush off his concerns with a kiss and a promise that everything would work out fine. Now, sitting alone in our apartment with my granddaughter's unopened birthday gift on the table, I wondered if Robert had seen something I'd been too loving to notice. The next morning brought another text from Mark. This one was different, though. Businesslike. Cold. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Dad's investment accounts. Can you meet me at the apartment this afternoon? It's important." My heart skipped. Robert's investment accounts were something I rarely thought about anymore. After he died, Mark had helped me navigate the complicated paperwork, the legal documents, the financial maze that death leaves behind. He'd been so helpful then, so patient with my questions, so understanding when I couldn't follow the technical language the lawyers used. "What about them?" I texted back. "Just some paperwork stuff." "I'll explain when I see you." That afternoon, Mark arrived with a manila folder thick with documents. He looked tired, older than his 42 years. His hair was thinning on top, and he'd gained weight around his middle. Success hadn't been kind to him physically, but then again, maybe success hadn't found him at all. "Mom, sit down," he said, setting the folder on my kitchen table. "This is complicated, but I need to explain something about Dad's accounts." My stomach tightened. When someone starts a conversation by telling you to sit down, you know whatever comes next won't be good news. "What kind of something?" I asked. Mark opened the folder and pulled out several sheets of paper covered in numbers and official-looking seals. Dad invested in some high-risk securities before he died. I've been managing them for you, trying to minimize the losses, but... He paused, running his hand through his hair. Mom, we need to liquidate everything. The market is about to crash in that sector, and if we don't sell now, you could lose everything. I stared at the papers. The numbers meant nothing to me. Robert had always handled our investments, and after he died, I'd been grateful when Mark offered to take over. Financial planning was never my strength. I was a retired elementary school teacher who'd spent 40 years helping children learn to read, not learning to navigate Wall Street. How much are we talking about? I asked. About $1 million, Mark said quietly. Maybe a little more. $1 million. I'd had no idea Robert had managed to save that much. We'd lived modestly, never taking expensive vacations or buying luxury items. Apparently, his careful planning had paid off more than I'd realized. But if we sell now, we can protect most of it, Mark continued. I have a buyer lined up, someone who's willing to purchase the whole portfolio. But we need to move fast. Like, today, fast. Something felt wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way, but wrong in the way your body knows before your mind does. The way you feel uneasy in an empty parking garage even when you can't see any danger. The way animals sense earthquakes before the ground starts shaking. Can't we get a second opinion? I asked. Maybe talk to a financial advisor who's not family? Mark's expression shifted slightly. Just for a moment, but I caught it. Impatience. Irritation. The look of someone who's been questioned when they expected immediate compliance. Mom, there isn't time for that. The market closes in 3 hours. If we wait until tomorrow, it could be too late. He reached across the table and took my hand. His skin was soft, unlike his father's working man's calluses. I know this is scary. I know it's a lot of money, but I'm trying to protect you here. This is what Dad would have wanted. The mention of Robert hit like a physical blow. Mark knew exactly what he was doing when he invoked his father's name. He knew I'd been questioning every decision since Robert died, wondering if I was making choices he would have approved of. He knew that my biggest fear wasn't losing money. It was making a mistake that Robert wouldn't have made. So I signed the papers. I signed every single one of them, my hand shaking slightly as I wrote my name over and over again. Eleanor Henderson. Eleanor Henderson. Eleanor Henderson. Each signature felt like I was giving away a piece of myself, but Mark was right there, reassuring me, telling me I was doing the right thing. This will all be over by tomorrow, he promised as he tucked the papers back into the manila folder. The buyer will transfer the funds directly to your checking account. You'll have access to everything by Thursday morning. Thursday came and went. No money appeared in my account. Friday, I called Mark. Voicemail. Saturday, I called again. This time he answered. Mom, there's been a slight delay, he said. His voice sounded distant, distracted. Some paperwork got held up at the bank. Should be resolved by Monday. Monday turned into Tuesday. Tuesday became Wednesday. By the following Friday, I'd left 17 voicemails and sent 12 text messages. Mark finally called me back. Mom, you need to stop calling me, he said, and there was something in his tone I'd never heard before, something hard and final. The deal fell through. The buyer backed out at the last minute. The money, it's tied up in legal issues now. It could be months before we can access it. Months? My voice came out as a whisper. Mark, that money, that was all I had left from your father. I know, I'm sorry. I'm working on it, okay? But you calling me every 5 minutes isn't helping anything. The line went dead. My son had hung up on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my small apartment, past the photos of happier times, past Robert's empty chair, past the kitchen table where I'd signed away my financial security. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But what could I do? I was a 73-year-old woman who understood children's literature better than financial documents. I was alone in a city full of people, with a bank account that held $3,000 and monthly expenses that barely fit within my Social Security check. I was afraid to ask for help, because asking meant admitting I might have made a terrible mistake. Weeks passed. I lived carefully, buying generic groceries, skipping meals, turning down my heat to save on the electric bill. I told myself this was temporary. Mark would sort everything out. The money would reappear. My son wouldn't steal from me. But late at night, when the city finally quieted to a gentle hum and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a different truth whispered in the darkness. A truth I wasn't ready to face. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came on a Thursday evening in March. I was watching the local news when a story caught my attention. A financial advisor in Connecticut had been arrested for embezzling money from elderly clients. The reporter described how he'd gained their trust, convinced them to sign over their assets, then disappeared with millions of dollars. The victims were primarily older adults, the reporter said, who trusted the advisor because of family recommendations or long-standing relationships. My blood ran cold. Family recommendations. Long-standing relationships. I turned off the television and sat in the silence of my apartment. Outside, someone was playing music too loud, and a couple was arguing in the hallway about money. New York sounds. Normal sounds. But inside my chest, my heart was beating so hard I could hear it. The next morning, I called my bank. After being transferred 3 times, I finally spoke to a manager who could access my account history. Mrs. Henderson, I see the transactions you're asking about. There were 2 large transfers on March 15th. One outgoing transfer for $1.2 million and one incoming transfer for the same amount? Incoming? My voice cracked. What do you mean incoming? According to our records, the money was transferred out of your investment account and then immediately transferred back in. But then... He paused, and I could hear computer keys clicking. Ma'am, there was another outgoing transfer the same day, for the full amount, to an account registered under Mark Henderson. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto my kitchen floor. Mark Henderson, my son. My baby boy who I'd held during thunderstorms and taught to ride a bicycle and sent to college with love letters tucked in his care packages. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. Ma'am, are you still there? Yes, I whispered. I'm here. Would you like me to flag this account for suspicious activity? We can initiate an investigation. No, I said quickly. Too quickly. No, that won't be necessary. It's family business. Even then, even with the evidence literally spelled out in banking records, I was protecting him. I was making excuses. I was choosing to believe there had to be some explanation that made sense, some reason that justified what looked like theft but couldn't possibly be theft, because mothers don't raise sons who steal from them. But that night, lying in bed with the knowledge burning in my stomach like acid, I finally allowed myself to think the word I'd been avoiding. Stolen. My son had stolen from me. The man I'd carried in my body for 9 months, whose fever I'd stayed up all night to monitor, whose college tuition I'd paid with money Robert and I had saved by eating hamburger instead of steak and driving used cars until they died on the highway. The man who called me every Christmas and every birthday with just enough warmth in his voice to make me believe things would get better. The man who'd held my hand at his father's funeral and promised me I'd never be alone. He had stolen everything. I must have cried that night, but I don't remember the tears. What I remember is the silence afterward. The empty, echoing silence of finally understanding how completely I'd been betrayed. The next several weeks passed like a fever dream. I went through the motions of living, grocery shopping, paying bills, walking to the pharmacy for my blood pressure medication. But inside, I felt hollow, scooped out, like someone had reached inside my chest and removed everything that had once been Eleanor Henderson. I stopped calling Mark. Not because I'd forgiven him, but because I finally understood that my calls were unwelcome. I was an inconvenience now, a problem to be managed rather than a mother to be loved. The invitations stopped coming entirely. Not that there had been many to begin with, but now even the obligatory holiday dinners and birthday parties disappeared from my calendar. Emma's birthday party, the one I'd been uninvited to, came and went without any acknowledgement that I existed. I started having conversations with Robert. I know how that sounds. But when you've lived with someone for 43 years, their voice doesn't just disappear when they die. It echoes in your memory, offering comfort when you need it most. I should have listened to you, I told him one evening, sitting in his chair with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands. You tried to warn me about Mark. And I could almost hear his response. Ellie, honey, love makes us blind sometimes. But it doesn't make us stupid. You know what you need to do. But what did I need to do? Call the police? Hire a lawyer I couldn't afford? Confront my son and demand my money back? Each option seemed impossible for different reasons. I was tired, I was old, and I was alone in a way I'd never been alone before. It was Grace Moretti who saved me from drowning in my own despair. Grace lived in apartment 4B, 2 floors above me. She was 81 years old, with silver hair she wore in a neat bun and eyes that missed nothing. We'd been neighbors for nearly 20 years, sharing polite hellos in the elevator and occasional conversations about the weather. But Grace was observant in the way that people who've lived long lives often are. She noticed when I stopped getting visitors. She noticed when I started looking thinner, more fragile. She noticed when my light stayed on too late because I couldn't sleep. One Tuesday afternoon, there was a knock on my door. Grace stood in the hallway holding a covered casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. "Eleanor, honey, you look terrible," she said with the kind of brutal honesty that only comes from genuine caring. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" I wanted to lie, to tell her I was fine, to maintain the fiction that my life was still under control. But something about Grace's directness broke through my defenses. "I don't remember," I admitted. She pushed past me into my apartment, set the casserole dish on my kitchen counter, and began opening cabinets. What she found, or didn't find, told the whole story. Nearly empty shelves, a refrigerator containing little more than condiments and wilted vegetables, a cookie jar that had once been full of Robert's favorite ginger snaps, now holding nothing but crumbs and memories. "Sit," Grace commanded, pointing to my kitchen table. "We're going to talk." And I did. I sat at my own kitchen table while this woman I barely knew heated up what turned out to be the most delicious chicken parmesan I'd eaten in months. While it warmed in my oven, Grace made coffee, real coffee, not the instant powder I'd been stretching to make last, and sat across from me with the kind of expectant patience that meant she wasn't leaving until I told her what was wrong. So I told her. Everything. I told her about Mark and the investment accounts and the papers I'd signed without fully understanding them. I told her about the money that had disappeared and the phone calls that went unanswered and the birthday party invitation that had been revoked. I told her about lying awake at night wondering if I'd somehow deserved this, if I'd been a bad mother, if I'd failed in some fundamental way that had caused my own son to reject me. Grace listened without interrupting. She didn't offer platitudes about family being complicated or sons needing time to grow up. She didn't suggest that I was misunderstanding the situation or that there might be a reasonable explanation I hadn't considered. Instead, when I finished talking, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Eleanor," she said, "your son is a thief." The words hit me like a slap, but not because they were cruel. They hit me because they were true, and truth has a weight to it that lies don't carry. Truth settles into your bones and changes the way you see everything that came before. "I know," I whispered, and he's counting on you to be too ashamed or too afraid or too loving to do anything about it. I know that too. So the question is, Grace said, squeezing my hand, what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer that day, but for the first time in months, I felt like maybe I didn't have to have all the answers immediately. Maybe it was enough to simply acknowledge the truth and sit with it for a while. Grace came back the next day, and the day after that. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she brought old movies to watch on my small television. Sometimes she just brought herself and her unwavering presence. She told me stories about her own life, growing up during the Depression, raising 4 children as a single mother after her husband died young, starting over at 60 when she thought her life was essentially finished. "You think you're too old to start over," she said one afternoon while we folded laundry together. "But starting over isn't about age. It's about deciding you deserve better than what you've been accepting." I'm 73, Grace. What am I going to start over with? With whatever you have left, she replied simply, which is more than you think. It was Grace who suggested I check my home security system. I'd almost forgotten about it. A simple camera setup Robert had installed after a break-in 3 buildings over. The cameras were small, discreet, positioned to monitor the main living areas of my apartment. I'd stopped thinking about them after Robert died, but they'd been quietly recording everything that happened in my home, including the day Mark had come over with his manila folder full of papers. The footage was stored on a small device connected to my television. Grace helped me figure out how to access it, her patience infinite as I struggled with technology that seemed designed for people with steadier hands and clearer minds. We scrolled back through weeks of recordings. Most of it was just me, moving through my daily routines like a ghost haunting her own life. But then we found it. March 15th. The day I'd signed the papers, I watched myself answer the door, watched Mark come in with his folder, watched the entire conversation unfold from a perspective that felt surreal and violating. Seeing yourself from the outside is strange enough under normal circumstances. Seeing yourself get manipulated and lied to by your own child is something else entirely. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part came at the end of the recording, after I'd signed all the papers and Mark had left. About an hour later, the recording showed Mark returning to my apartment. He had a key I'd given him 1 year ago for emergencies, and he used it to let himself in while I was taking a nap. The cameras caught everything. Mark going directly to my small home office, sitting down at my computer, and systematically deleting files. Banking records, investment documents, email correspondence with financial institutions. He spent nearly 2 hours erasing every trace of digital evidence that might have helped me understand what had happened to my money. But here's what he didn't know. The security system had its own internal storage that he couldn't access from my computer. Every moment of his deception was preserved in digital amber, waiting for someone to discover it. Grace and I watched the footage in silence. When it ended, I turned to look at her, and she was crying. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I wasn't crying. I felt empty, but not in the hollow way I'd felt before. This was different. This was the empty feeling you get after releasing something you've been carrying for too long. The empty feeling of relief. "Now you know," Grace said. "The question is still the same. What are you going to do?" This time, I had an answer. I'm going to fight back. The first step was the hardest. Admitting to myself that my son was never going to voluntarily return my money or apologize for taking it. He wasn't going through a rough patch or making poor decisions that he'd regret later. He was a grown man who had deliberately and systematically stolen from his elderly mother, then covered his tracks to avoid getting caught. Once I accepted that reality, the path forward became clearer. I made copies of the security footage. Grace helped me figure out how to save it to multiple devices, how to upload it to cloud storage, how to protect the evidence in case something happened to the original files. We were like elderly detectives, learning technology out of necessity rather than interest. Then I called a lawyer. Not Mark's lawyer, the one who'd helped with Robert's estate and who I now realized might have been compromised from the beginning. I called a different lawyer, one who specialized in elder abuse cases and who offered free initial consultations. Her name was Patricia Chen, and she was younger than my son, but infinitely more trustworthy. She had kind eyes and a firm handshake, and the sort of professional competence that made me feel like maybe I wasn't completely powerless after all. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, after reviewing my security footage and bank records, "what your son did is called financial elder abuse. It's a serious crime, and it's more common than most people realize. Is there anything I can do to get my money back? Maybe. It depends on what he did with it and how quickly we act. But I need to ask you something difficult." She leaned forward in her chair. "Are you prepared for this to destroy your relationship with your son permanently? Because once we start legal proceedings, there's no going back to the way things were." I thought about birthday parties I wouldn't be invited to, phone calls that would never come, a granddaughter I might never see again. The final, complete severing of whatever remained of my family. "There's nothing left to destroy," I said. "He already took care of that." Patricia filed a civil lawsuit within the week. She also contacted the district attorney's office to report the theft, though she warned me that criminal charges were less likely to result in recovered funds than a civil case. "The goal here," she explained, "is to freeze his assets before he can hide everything. If we can prove he took your money, we can potentially get a court order requiring him to return it." The legal wheels moved slowly, but they moved. Within a month, Mark received his first official notice that he was being sued by his own mother. Patricia said he'd probably try to contact me directly, to negotiate or threaten or manipulate me into dropping the case. She was right. The call came on a Wednesday evening. I was having dinner with Grace. She'd started eating with me most nights, claiming she didn't like to cook for just one person, when my phone rang. "Don't answer it," Grace said, looking at the caller ID. "Let him leave a voicemail." But I answered anyway. Maybe I needed to hear what he would say. Maybe I needed to know if there was any remorse left in him, any acknowledgement of what he'd done to me. "Mom?" His voice was cold, controlled. Not the voice of someone calling to apologize. "We need to talk." "Hello, Mark. What the hell do you think you're doing, suing me? This is insane. We're family." "Yes," I said quietly. "We're family. That's why this is so much worse than if you'd been a stranger." "Mom, listen to me. You're making a huge mistake. You don't understand what's going on here. That money, Dad's money, it's tied up in investments. I told you that. I'm trying to protect it, to grow it for you, and you're sabotaging everything by involving lawyers." I looked at Grace, who was shaking her head and making throat-slitting gestures with her hand. She was right. This conversation wasn't going to accomplish anything except give Mark an opportunity to manipulate me further. "Mark," I interrupted. "I saw the security footage." Silence. Complete, echoing silence. "I saw you delete the files from my computer. I saw you cover your tracks. I know exactly what you did." When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. The mask had finally slipped completely. "You recorded me? In your own home? What kind of mother spies on her own son?" "The kind whose son steals from her," I replied. "Fine. You want to do this the hard way? We'll do it the hard way. But don't come crying to me when you lose everything. Don't come crawling back when you realize the lawyers are going to cost more than whatever you think you're going to recover. And don't expect to see Emma again. Ever." The line went dead. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from anger. Pure, righteous anger at a man who would use a 7-year-old child as a weapon against her own grandmother. "How do you feel?" Grace asked. "Terrible," I admitted. "And better than I've felt in years." She nodded. "That's what healing feels like sometimes. It hurts before it helps." The legal case moved forward with agonizing slowness. There were depositions and document requests and court filings that consumed most of my remaining savings just to understand. Patricia worked on a contingency basis, meaning she'd get paid only if we recovered money. But there were still court costs and administrative fees and a dozen other expenses I hadn't anticipated. Some days I wondered if Mark had been right about one thing. The lawyers might end up costing more than I'd recover. But this had stopped being about money alone. This had become about dignity, about refusing to disappear quietly, about proving to myself that I still had some fight left. The breakthrough came 4 months after we'd filed suit. Patricia's investigators had been tracing Mark's financial records, following the digital trail of where my stolen money had gone. What they discovered was both infuriating and encouraging. Mark had used most of the money to purchase a vacation home in the Hamptons. A beautiful waterfront property that he'd bought under his own name, making no effort to hide the transaction. The hubris was breathtaking. He'd been so confident that I'd never fight back that he'd bought luxury real estate with my stolen inheritance. "This actually makes our case much stronger," Patricia explained. "We can prove exactly where the money went, and real estate is much harder to hide than cash. We can get a court order to seize the property if necessary." But Mark wasn't finished fighting. As the case progressed and it became clear that he might actually have to face consequences for his actions, he shifted strategies. Instead of continuing to deny what he'd done, he began trying to justify it. His lawyer, expensive, well-dressed, and clearly more concerned with winning than with truth, painted a picture of an ungrateful mother who had failed to appreciate her son's financial expertise. They claimed that Mark had acted with my full knowledge and consent, that he was managing my investments responsibly, and that I was now suffering from age-related cognitive decline that made me unable to understand complex financial matters. It was devastating to sit in that courtroom and listen to my own son's lawyer essentially argue that I was too senile to manage my own affairs. But it was also clarifying. Any remaining doubt I'd had about whether Mark truly loved me evaporated completely. You don't accuse someone you love of being mentally incompetent just to avoid taking responsibility for stealing from them. The case went to trial on a gray October morning. I wore my best dress, navy blue with small white flowers, the one Robert had always said brought out my eyes, and sat beside Patricia while a room full of strangers decided whether my son was a thief. The security footage was the star witness. Clear, undeniable evidence of Mark returning to my apartment, accessing my computer, and systematically deleting files. His lawyer tried to explain it away, claiming he was helping me organize my digital records. But the timing made their argument absurd. Why would you delete banking records on the same day you convince your mother to liquidate her investments? The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned with a verdict in my favor, awarding me the full amount Mark had stolen plus interest and legal fees, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: vindication. But victory in court and victory in life are two different things. The judge ordered Mark to return my money within 30 days, but court orders don't automatically make assets reappear. Mark had taken out mortgages against the Hampton house, borrowed against other investments, and generally made recovering my money as complicated as possible. It would take another 6 months of legal maneuvering to actually see any money returned to my account. And even then, after all the legal fees and court costs and investigator expenses, I recovered about 60% of what had been taken. 60%. Not perfect, but enough to restore my financial security and dignity. More importantly, I'd learned something about myself that I'd forgotten over the years of being dismissed and manipulated. I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for, including myself. The money started flowing back into my account in small installments as Mark's various assets were liquidated. Each deposit felt like a small victory, a validation that I'd been right to fight, right to refuse to disappear quietly. But the real victory came from something else entirely. About a week after the final court judgment, I was grocery shopping at the Fairway on Broadway when I ran into Sandra and Emma in the produce section. I saw them before they saw me, and for a moment I considered changing direction, avoiding the confrontation entirely. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd learned about standing up for myself, and I walked directly toward them. "Hello, Sandra. Hello, Emma." Sandra's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, embarrassment, defiance, and finally something that might have been shame. Emma, beautiful Emma with her curly dark hair and her father's green eyes, looked confused. "Grandma Eleanor." Emma broke free from her mother's hand and threw her arms around my waist. 7 years old and still willing to show love without conditions or reservations. "I missed you. Where have you been?" I looked at Sandra over Emma's head. Her face was pale, and she was gripping the shopping cart handle so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "I've been right here, sweetheart," I told Emma, stroking her hair. "I've been right here the whole time." "Mommy said you were sick," Emma continued, still hugging me. "She said that's why we couldn't see you anymore." Out of the mouths of babes. Even at 7, Emma understood that something wasn't right about my sudden disappearance from her life. "I was sick for a while," I said, still looking at Sandra. "But I'm feeling much better now." Sandra finally found her voice. "Eleanor, we should probably go. Mark is expecting us home soon." "Of course." I kissed the top of Emma's head and gently disentangled myself from her hug. "You be good for your mommy, okay?" As they walked away, Emma turned back to wave at me. That little wave, so innocent and full of love, broke something open in my chest. Not in a painful way, but in the way that happens when something that's been locked up too long is finally set free. I finished my shopping with tears on my cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of recognition that love, real love, doesn't disappear just because someone tries to weaponize it. 3 days later, Sandra called. Her voice was quiet, hesitant, nothing like the cold dismissiveness I'd grown accustomed to. "Eleanor? It's Sandra. I was wondering, could we talk?" We met at a coffee shop near Columbia University, neutral territory where neither of us would have the home field advantage. Sandra looked older than I remembered, more tired. Being married to Mark couldn't have been easy, especially if she'd known what he was doing to me. "I didn't know," she said before I could even order my coffee. "About the money, about what Mark did to you. I didn't know until the lawyers got involved." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. But what I saw was genuine distress, genuine shame. "But you knew I was being excluded from Emma's life," I said. "You knew about the canceled birthday party." Sandra nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Mark said, he said you were getting too demanding, too needy. He said you were putting pressure on us financially and emotionally, and that we needed some space to figure things out." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him," she admitted. It was easier than confronting what I was starting to suspect about my husband. We talked for 2 hours. Sandra told me about Mark's increasing erratic behavior over the past year, his secretiveness about money, his angry outbursts when she asked questions about their finances. She told me about finding receipts for expensive purchases she didn't recognize, about credit card statements that disappeared before she could read them, about the growing sense that her husband was lying to her about fundamental aspects of their life together. "The house in the Hamptons," she said finally. "I found out about it the same day you sued him. He'd been telling me it was a rental, that his company was paying for it. But when the lawyers got involved, I learned he'd bought it with cash. $1 million in cash that I knew we didn't have." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I filed for divorce yesterday," she said quietly. "And I want Emma to have a relationship with you if you're willing. She asks about you constantly. She doesn't understand why her grandmother disappeared." 6 months later, Emma and I were sitting in my living room working on a jigsaw puzzle. A 1,000-piece puzzle featuring a garden full of flowers, the kind of peaceful scene that requires patience and persistence to complete. Emma had better eyesight than me, but I had better pattern recognition than her, so we made a good team. "Grandma Eleanor," she said, carefully placing a piece of sky into the upper corner, "why didn't Daddy come to my birthday party this year?" Mark had missed Emma's 8th birthday party. He was supposed to have visitation that weekend, but he'd canceled at the last minute with some excuse about a business trip. In reality, he was still dealing with the legal and financial consequences of stealing from me, and he'd become increasingly unreliable about everything, including his responsibilities as a father. "Sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love," I said carefully. "Your daddy is going through a difficult time right now." "Because he took your money?" Children see through adult nonsense with startling clarity. Sandra had tried to explain the divorce and the family upheaval in age-appropriate terms, but Emma was smart enough to understand the basic truth. Her father had done something wrong to her grandmother, and there had been consequences. "Yes," I said, "because he took my money." "Are you still mad at him?" I considered the question seriously. Was I still angry? The hot, burning anger that had sustained me through months of legal battles had cooled to something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but something closer to acceptance. "I'm disappointed in him," I said finally. "I'm sad that he chose to hurt me instead of asking for help, but I'm not letting my disappointment poison the rest of my life." Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense to her. Maybe it did. Children often have a better understanding of fairness and justice than adults do. "I'm glad you're not sick anymore," she said, fitting another puzzle piece into place. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The money that Mark had stolen, the 60% I managed to recover, changed my life in ways that went far beyond financial security. It bought me freedom from fear, freedom from the constant worry about whether I'd be able to pay my bills or afford my medications. But more than that, it bought me the knowledge that I could take care of myself, that I didn't need to accept mistreatment just to avoid being alone. I started traveling, something Robert and I had always planned to do in retirement, but never quite managed. My first trip was to Chicago, the city I'd dreamed of visiting since I was Emma's age. I stayed in a nice hotel near Millennium Park, ate deep-dish pizza, visited the Art Institute, and took a boat tour of the architecture along the Chicago River. I was terrified the entire time, not of the city itself, but of being a 73-year-old woman traveling alone. What if I got lost? What if I had a medical emergency? What if something happened to me and nobody noticed for days? But nothing happened except life. Beautiful, ordinary life. I met a couple from Germany who were also visiting the art museum, and we spent an afternoon comparing notes about our favorite paintings. I struck up conversations with strangers in coffee shops and discovered that most people are kind when you give them the chance to be. I learned that I could navigate unfamiliar places, solve unexpected problems, and enjoy my own company in ways I'd forgotten were possible. When I came home from that first trip, Grace was waiting for me with homemade soup and a bottle of wine. "You look different," she said, studying my face carefully. "I feel different." "Good different or bad different?" "Brave different," I said. Like I remembered something about myself I'd forgotten. Grace raised her wine glass. "To remembering who you are." "To remembering who I am," I agreed. Over the past year, I've taken 6 more trips. Boston for the fall foliage, Charleston for the history and architecture, San Antonio for the Riverwalk and the warm weather in January. Each trip taught me something new about my own resilience, my own capacity for joy. But the most important journey I took was much shorter. Down the hallway to Grace's apartment, where I learned that loneliness doesn't have to be permanent. Grace and I have become genuine friends, the kind of friendship I'd thought was impossible to develop at our age. We watch old movies together, share meals, gossip about our neighbors, and support each other through everything from minor illnesses to major life transitions. When Grace's arthritis made it difficult for her to manage her own grocery shopping, I started doing it for both of us. When I struggled with the technology needed to video chat with Emma, Grace patiently taught me how to use FaceTime. We've created the kind of chosen family that proves blood isn't the only thing that makes people matter to each other. Mark and I haven't spoken since the day he threatened to keep Emma away from me. True to his word, he's made no effort to maintain any relationship with me. He sends no birthday cards, makes no holiday phone calls, offers no apologies or explanations. In his mind, I suspect, I'm the villain of our story, the ungrateful mother who destroyed their family by refusing to be quietly victimized. Some days, this still hurts. Not because I miss the man he became, but because I miss the little boy he used to be. I miss the child who ran to me when he was scared, who trusted me to make everything better, who believed I was the wisest person in the world. That child is gone, replaced by a man who sees me as an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to love. But I've learned to separate my grief for the son I thought I had from my acceptance of the man he actually is. I can mourn the relationship I wanted without continuing to accept the mistreatment I received. Sandra has been true to her word about wanting Emma to have a relationship with me. Every other weekend, Emma spends Saturday afternoon with me. We go to museums, explore different neighborhoods, work on craft projects, and talk about everything from her favorite books to her worries about starting middle school next year. These Saturday afternoons have become the highlight of my week. Not because I need Emma to fill some void in my life, but because I get to know this remarkable person she's becoming. She's inherited her grandfather Robert's curiosity and her mother's determination, but she has something uniquely her own, a fierce sense of justice that reminds me of myself at her age. Last month, she asked me to help her with a school project about family history. We spent an afternoon going through old photo albums, and I told her stories about her great-grandparents, about the house where I grew up, about the different jobs I'd had before becoming a teacher. "Grandma Eleanor," she said as we looked at a picture of me from 1975, standing in front of my first classroom, "were you scared when you started teaching?" "Terrified," I admitted. I was only 22 years old, and I was responsible for helping 30 children learn to read. It felt impossible. "But you did it anyway?" "I did it anyway." She studied the photo for a long moment. "I think you're the bravest person I know." Coming from Emma, this felt like the highest compliment I could possibly receive. Not because she thought I was brave for fighting back against her father, but because she recognized that bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. This morning, I woke up at 5:30 as usual. But instead of lying in bed listening to the city wake up around me, I got dressed and walked to Central Park to watch the sunrise. It's something I've started doing a few times a week, a way of beginning each day with intention rather than just letting it happen to me. The park was quiet except for a few joggers and dog walkers. I found a bench near the reservoir and sat down to watch the sky change colors. Pink to orange to gold, the light gradually spreading across the water and the trees and the distant buildings of the Upper East Side. As I sat there, I thought about everything that had led me to this moment. The betrayal and the legal battles and the gradual process of rebuilding my life on my own terms. The fear and the anger and the slow discovery that I was stronger than I'd realized. The relationships lost and the relationships found, and the understanding that love, real love, doesn't require you to disappear. An elderly man with a small white dog stopped near my bench. The dog, curious and friendly, came over to sniff my shoes. "Beautiful morning," the man said. "It really is," I agreed. "I'm Harold," he said. "This is Mabel." The dog wagged her tail at the sound of her name. "I'm Eleanor. It's nice to meet you both." We chatted for a few minutes about the weather, about the park, about our respective neighborhoods. Nothing profound or life-changing, just the kind of pleasant human interaction that reminds you you're part of something larger than your own problems. After Harold and Mabel continued their walk, I sat for a while longer, thinking about the conversation I'd just had. 2 years ago, I would have been too shy to talk to a stranger, too convinced that I had nothing interesting to offer. Now, I can engage with new people naturally, confidently, without apologizing for taking up space in the world. This is what recovery looks like, I realized. Not a single dramatic moment of transformation, but a series of small changes that add up to a completely different way of being in the world. The ability to travel alone. The courage to fight for what's right. The wisdom to recognize that being treated poorly isn't the same thing as being loved. When I got home, there was a text message waiting for me. From Sandra. Eleanor, Emma wants to know if you'd like to come to her school's spring concert next Thursday evening. She has a solo in the choir performance. A year ago, an invitation like this would have filled me with anxiety. What if Mark was there? What if there was an awkward confrontation? What if Emma's invitation was somehow a mistake or manipulation? Now, my response was immediate and certain. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Because that's what healing has given me. The ability to show up fully for the people I love without constantly worrying about who might disapprove. The freedom to make choices based on what brings joy rather than what avoids conflict. Tonight, I'm having dinner with Grace. We're trying a new recipe for Italian wedding soup that she found in an old cookbook. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with Patricia to discuss setting up a proper estate plan, something I should have done years ago but was too overwhelmed to tackle. Next week, Emma's concert. Next month, a trip to Savannah that I've been planning for months. Next year, who knows? The possibilities feel infinite in a way they haven't felt in decades. I know some people might think I should be sad about losing my relationship with Mark, that I should regret pursuing legal action against my own son, that family reconciliation should be more important than personal dignity. But those people don't understand what it's like to spend years disappearing a little more each day, accepting less and less respect, until you barely exist in your own life. They don't understand that sometimes love means saying no, setting boundaries, refusing to enable destructive behavior even when it comes from someone you'd die for. I don't regret fighting back. I regret waiting so long to do it. The money Mark stole was just money. It can be replaced, earned back, lived without if necessary. But the years I spent accepting his disrespect, making excuses for his cruelty, convincing myself that being used was better than being alone, those years can't be recovered. What I can do is make sure the remaining years of my life are lived on my own terms, with dignity and joy, and the kind of love that lifts people up rather than diminishing them. This evening, as the sun sets over Manhattan and the city lights begin to twinkle like earthbound stars, I'm sitting in Robert's old chair with a cup of tea and a book I've been meaning to read for months. The apartment is quiet but not lonely, peaceful in the way that comes from being exactly where you choose to be. Grace will be here soon with her homemade soup and her endless supply of stories about the various characters who live in our building. Emma will call after dinner to tell me about her day at school. I have plans for the weekend, friends to see, places to go. My life isn't perfect. I still miss Robert every day. I still feel sad sometimes about the relationship with Mark that never was and never will be. I still worry about getting older, about eventual illness, about the inevitable challenges that come with aging in a world that often treats elderly people as invisible. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of being alone, not of standing up for myself, not of taking up space in the world. I've learned that dignity isn't something that can be taken from you. It's something you give away, and something you can choose to reclaim. The most important lesson I've learned is this: it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. It's never too late to choose love over fear, dignity over acceptance, truth over comfortable lies. I think about the woman I was 2 years ago. Frightened, confused, isolated, convinced that being mistreated was better than being alone. That woman wouldn't recognize the person I've become. She wouldn't believe that such transformation was possible at 73 years old. But here I am, living proof that you can start over at any age, that you can find strength you didn't know you had, that you can build a life worth living even after everything seems lost. If you're listening to my story and it sounds familiar, if you recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, afraid to rock the boat, convinced that love means accepting whatever treatment people choose to give you, certain that demanding respect will leave you alone, I want you to know something. You are stronger than you think. You deserve better than what you're accepting. And it's not too late to change your story. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries. The people who don't respect your boundaries don't truly love you, no matter what they claim or what relationship they have to you. Family isn't an excuse for abuse. Love isn't supposed to hurt. You don't have to accept financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, or any other form of mistreatment just because it comes from someone who shares your DNA. You don't have to disappear to keep other people comfortable. You don't have to buy love with money, time, or pieces of your soul. And if you do choose to fight back, to demand better, to reclaim your dignity, you might lose some relationships. But what you'll gain is yourself. And that trade is always worth making. But beyond all the legal battles and family drama, what I've discovered is that starting over at 73 isn't just possible. It's liberating in ways I never expected. Every morning when I wake up now, I have choices. Real choices about how to spend my day, who to spend it with, what adventures to pursue. Last Tuesday, I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center. I haven't picked up a paintbrush since high school, but there's something appealing about learning to create beauty again. The instructor is a woman my age named Margaret, who started painting after her retirement from nursing. She told me that art doesn't have expiration dates, that creativity can bloom at any stage of life. The only difference between starting at 70 and starting at 20, she said as I struggled with mixing colors, is that at 70, you don't have time to waste pretending you're not good enough. She was right. There's something freeing about being old enough to try new things without caring whether you're naturally talented at them. I paint terrible flowers and wonky landscapes, but they're my terrible flowers and wonky landscapes, and they bring me joy in ways that Mark's approval never did. Grace has started joining me for the painting classes. Her arthritis makes holding the brush difficult some days, but she's stubborn about not letting physical limitations define what she can do. She paints abstract pieces full of bold colors and surprising textures, art that reflects the fierce independence that helped her survive 8 decades of life. You know what I love about painting? She asked me last week as we worked on still lifes of fruit bowls. Nobody can steal it from you. Nobody can liquidate your ability to see beauty and try to capture it. She didn't mean it as a reference to Mark, but her words hit home anyway. All those years I spent giving away pieces of myself, my money, my time, my self-respect, and never realizing that the most important things couldn't be taken unless I allowed it. My capacity for joy, my ability to form new relationships, my willingness to keep learning and growing. Those treasures were always mine to keep. Emma came to visit yesterday, and I showed her some of my paintings. She studied them with the serious attention she brings to everything, her little face scrunched in concentration. "They're not very good, are they?" I said, laughing. "They're not supposed to be good," she replied matter-of-factly. "They're supposed to be yours." Out of the mouths of babes. This 8-year-old understood something about art and authenticity that it had taken me 7 decades to learn. We spent the afternoon working on a painting together, Emma guiding my hand to help create a butterfly garden that was part her vision and part mine. As we painted, she told me about school, about a friend who'd been mean to her, about her worries that her parents' divorce meant something was wrong with her. "Divorce isn't about you, sweetheart," I told her, helping her add purple wings to a butterfly. Sometimes adults grow apart, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just what happens sometimes. Is that why you and Daddy don't talk anymore? Because you grew apart? The question caught me off guard. How do you explain financial elder abuse and betrayal to a child? How do you tell your granddaughter that her father is a thief without poisoning her relationship with him? Your daddy and I had a disagreement about some grown-up things, I said carefully. Sometimes when people disagree about important things, it takes time to work through it. Will you work through it eventually? I paused, brush hovering over the canvas. The honest answer was probably no. Mark had shown me who he truly was, and I'd learned to believe him. But Emma didn't need to carry the weight of that knowledge. I hope so, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I did hope that someday Mark might find his way to genuine remorse and attempt to make amends. I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for it, but hope costs nothing. Emma nodded, satisfied with this answer, and went back to adding details to her butterflies. Children, I've noticed, are remarkably resilient when adults are honest with them without overwhelming them with adult complexities. Speaking of children, I've started volunteering at a local elementary school, helping first graders with their reading. It's only 2 mornings a week, but it reminds me why I became a teacher in the first place. There's something magical about watching a child's face when letters suddenly become words, when words become stories, when stories become doorways to infinite possibilities. My favorite student is a little girl named Amara who reminds me of Emma at that age, all curiosity and determination. She struggles with reading, but she refuses to give up. Every small victory feels monumental, every breakthrough a reminder that growth is possible at any age. Mrs. Henderson, she said to me yesterday, sounding out the words in a simple book about cats. Why do some stories have sad parts? Because that's how life is, I told her. But the wonderful thing about stories is that sad parts usually aren't the end. There are usually more pages, more chances for things to get better. Like real life? Especially like real life. She smiled and went back to her book, and I thought about the story I'm still writing with my own life. The chapter with Mark was painful, but it wasn't the final chapter. There are still pages to fill, still chances for joy and growth and unexpected plot twists. One of those unexpected plot twists came in the form of a phone call from Patricia Chen last month. The criminal case against Mark, which had been moving slowly through the district attorney's office, had finally resulted in charges being filed. Not just for stealing from me, but for a pattern of financial fraud that apparently included other victims. It turns out, Patricia explained, that you weren't the only elderly person Mark was targeting. The DA's office has identified at least 3 other cases with similar patterns. Your willingness to come forward and pursue the civil case gave other victims the courage to speak up too. This news filled me with conflicting emotions. Relief that Mark might finally face real consequences for his actions. Sadness that other families had gone through what I'd experienced. Pride that my decision to fight back had helped protect other potential victims. Will I have to testify in the criminal trial? I asked. Probably. Are you prepared for that? The thought of facing Mark in a courtroom again, of having to relive the betrayal in front of a jury, wasn't pleasant. But if it meant protecting other elderly people from experiencing what I'd gone through, then yes, I was prepared. I'll do whatever needs to be done, I told her. The criminal trial is scheduled for this fall. Sandra has already told me that she and Emma might have to testify too, since they were witnesses to Mark's behavior and lifestyle changes during the time he was stealing from multiple victims. It won't be easy for any of us, but sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy. In the meantime, I'm focusing on building a life that isn't defined by what was taken from me, but by what I've chosen to create with what remains. That includes nurturing my friendship with Grace, which has become one of the most important relationships in my life. She's teaching me to play bridge, a game that requires strategy and memory and the kind of quick thinking I thought I'd lost. I'm teaching her to use email and video calling, technologies that help her stay connected with her children and grandchildren who live across the country. We've become each other's chosen family, proof that meaningful connections can bloom at any stage of life if you're open to them. When Grace had a small stroke last winter, I was the one who found her and called the ambulance. The one who sat with her in the hospital until her daughter could fly in from California. When I had my annual anxiety attack on the anniversary of Robert's death, she was the one who brought tea and tissues and sat with me until the grief storm passed. "You know what I never expected about getting old?" Grace said to me the other night as we sat in my living room working on our bridge strategy. "What's that?" "I never expected to still be capable of new beginnings. I thought by 80, you were who you were, and that was that. But look at us, learning new games, making new friends, standing up to thieves and bullies like a couple of tough old broads." She was right. Society tells us that aging means shrinking, accepting less, preparing for the end. But my experience has been the opposite. Aging has meant expanding, demanding more, preparing for whatever adventures remain. I've started making a list of things I want to do while I still can. Not a bucket list, I hate that morbid term, but a joy list. Things that will add richness and meaning to however many years I have left. Visit the jazz clubs in New Orleans. Learn to tango. Write letters to all the teachers who influenced me over the years, if any are still alive. Take a cooking class and finally master Robert's favorite beef stew recipe. Read all of Jane Austen again, slowly this time, savoring the language. Plant a garden somewhere, even if it's just herbs in window boxes. Some of these dreams might be too ambitious for a 73-year-old woman with arthritis and a heart murmur. But some of them aren't. And I've learned that it's better to try and fail than to regret not trying at all. Last month, I checked off one item from my joy list. I went to see a Broadway show. Not just any show, but Hamilton, which I'd been wanting to see since it opened, but had been too intimidated to go alone and too proud to ask anyone to accompany me. Grace convinced me to get tickets for both of us. "Life's too short to wait for the perfect companion," she said. "Sometimes you have to be your own perfect companion." We dressed up, Grace in a burgundy dress that brought out her silver hair, me in the navy blue dress I'd worn to court, but now reclaimed for happier occasions. We took the subway down to Times Square like a couple of teenagers, giddy with the adventure of a night out in the city. The show was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. The music, the staging, the energy of live theater. It reminded me that beauty still exists in the world, that creativity and passion can triumph over cynicism and cruelty. During the song, "Wait for It," when Aaron Burr sings about not throwing away his shot, I found myself crying. Not sad tears, but tears of recognition. I had thrown away my shot for too many years, waiting for permission to live fully, waiting for other people to decide I was worth their time and attention. But it's never too late to stop waiting. It's never too late to grab your shot with both hands. As we walked to the subway after the show, Grace linked her arm through mine. "What did you think?" she asked. "I think I should have done this years ago." "Well, you did it now. That's what matters." She was right, as she usually is. The past can't be changed, but the present moment is always full of possibilities. That's what I try to remember on the difficult days. When grief sneaks up on me, or when I catch myself missing the family I thought I had. The present moment is where my power lives. Not in the past I can't change or the future I can't control, but in the choices I make right now, today, this minute. Today's choices include having lunch with a new friend I met in painting class, stopping by the school to help Amara work on her reading, and starting a new mystery novel Grace recommended. Small choices maybe, but they're mine to make. Tomorrow's choices might include booking that trip to New Orleans, or finally writing the letter to Mrs. Patterson, my third-grade teacher who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Or they might just include another peaceful morning in Central Park, another conversation with Harold and Mabel, Another ordinary day lived with intention and gratitude. The beautiful thing about starting over at 73 is that every day feels like a gift rather than an obligation. When you've faced the worst that family betrayal can offer and come out the other side stronger, ordinary pleasures become extraordinary treasures. This morning's gift was a call from Emma, excited to tell me about the book report she's writing on Charlotte's Web. She wanted to know if I thought Charlotte was brave for saving Wilbur, even though it cost her own life. "What do you think?" I asked her. "I think she was brave because she chose to use her talents to help someone, even when it was hard. And I think the most important thing is that Wilbur never forgot her." My granddaughter's wisdom continues to amaze me. Yes, Charlotte was brave. Yes, the most important thing is being remembered with love rather than regret. I hope that when my own story ends, many years from now, I hope, I'll be remembered not as a victim of financial elder abuse, but as a woman who found the courage to fight back. Not as someone who disappeared quietly to keep others comfortable, but as someone who insisted on taking up space in the world. Most of all, I hope I'll be remembered as a grandmother who showed Emma that you're never too old to stand up for yourself, never too old to demand respect, never too old to start over with dignity and joy. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not the money that was stolen and recovered, but the example of a woman who refused to disappear, who chose love over fear, truth over convenience, dignity over acceptance. Have you ever found yourself in a situation like mine? Have you watched someone you love diminish themselves little by little, accepting less and less respect until they barely exist in their own life? Have you been that person yourself? If so, I want you to know that it's never too late to remember who you are. It's never too late to demand better. It's never too late to choose dignity over peace, truth over comfortable lies, self-respect over other people's approval. The people who truly love you will support your decision to value yourself. The people who don't support that decision aren't people you need in your life, regardless of what DNA you might share with them. Your story isn't over yet. There are still pages to write, still choices to make, still joy to discover. Don't let anyone, not your children, not your family, not society's expectations about aging gracefully, convince you to make yourself smaller to fit their comfort zone. Take up space. Demand respect. Choose adventure over safety, growth over stagnation, truth over the lies that keep everyone else happy at your expense. You are worth fighting for. You always have been. And it's never ever too late to start believing that. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me share both the darkness and the light, the betrayal and the recovery, the ending that became a beginning. If my words have touched you, if they've reminded you of your own worth, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Every like, every subscription, every comment helps my story reach someone else who needs to hear it. Together, we can break the silence around elder abuse. Together, we can remind each other that aging doesn't mean accepting less. It can mean demanding more. Together, we can prove that it's never too late to start the life you deserve. The sun is setting now outside my apartment window, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold and pink. Grace will be here soon for our evening walk, and later Emma will call to say goodnight. I have a painting class tomorrow, a doctor's appointment on Friday, and a weekend trip to the Hudson Valley to see the spring flowers. My calendar is full, but not because I'm running from loneliness. It's full because I'm running toward joy, toward connection, toward all the experiences I denied myself for too many years while I waited for other people's permission to live. This is my life now. Not perfect, but mine. Not without sadness, but rich with purpose. Not free from challenges, but equipped with the knowledge that I can handle whatever comes next. At 73, I'm finally the woman I was always meant to be. Strong, dignified, unafraid, surrounded by people who love me not for what I can give them, but for who I am. It took losing everything to find myself, but I found myself, and that trade was worth